Welcome to a place where love is not ordinary, where every story reaches into the soul and refuses to let go. Here, desire awakens when least expected, shattering silence and loneliness with a fire that cannot be denied. Here, love is not measured by years or rules, but by the way two souls recognize one another in a glance, in a touch, in a kiss that erases all doubt. You will hear voices that speak of being truly seen, of intimacy that crosses every forbidden line, of passion wrapped in tenderness that transcends time itself. These are not just stories, they are confessions, raw and unfiltered, told from the depths of the heart. If you believe in love that defies age, love that awakens the forgotten, love that binds beyond reason, then you are exactly where you belong. It began so quietly, almost as if life had been holding its breath, waiting for a moment like this to arrive. Days had long felt like a repetition, a cycle of stillness where nothing stirred the heart anymore. Smiles had become polite gestures, laughter was something remembered rather than lived, and the nights were filled with the kind of silence that weighed heavy on the chest. Then suddenly, without warning, something shifted. It was not planned, not sought after, not even imagined possible. It was a glance that lingered longer than it should have, a conversation that carried a warmth impossible to ignore. An unexpected connection sparked in the most ordinary of moments, and from that tiny spark, everything began to change. At first, it felt harmless, almost innocent. Words were exchanged easily, laughter came unforced, and there was a comfort that should not have made sense but did. Each meeting felt lighter, each look carried something unspoken, and every touch of presence stirred something that had been dormant for years. It was as if the walls built high around the heart had quietly begun to crumble, not with force, but with the gentleness of someone who simply knew how to see what was hidden inside. What startled most was not just the connection itself, but how it felt in comparison to everything before it. For so long, affection had been distant, almost rehearsed, but here it was alive, burning with a quiet intensity that no one could prepare for. Every conversation left an echo, every smile lingered long after, and even silence felt full, as if unspoken words were humming between two hearts that had found a way to understand each other without effort. The awareness of age sat like a shadow at first. It was impossible not to notice, impossible not to question. He was younger, much younger, and everything about logic whispered that it could not, should not, go beyond the borders it was walking toward. And yet, logic fell quiet in the presence of something deeper. It wasn't youth that drew the heart closer, but the way he looked, the way he listened, the way his eyes carried a fire that pierced through every layer of doubt. It wasn't the number of years that mattered, but the undeniable truth that in his presence the soul felt alive again. Loneliness had lived like an old companion for too long. It was quiet but sharp, cutting in the small ways that wear a person down. The absence of being touched not by hands but by spirit had become normal. Days passed where being unseen was easier to accept than admitting the hunger to be noticed. Then came this unexpected light, this sudden awareness of being looked at, not for what was lost with time, but for what was still burning within. It was not just attraction, it was recognition, the rare kind that sees straight through the years and finds what is timeless. At first, there was resistance, a constant fight to push it away. Smiles were dismissed as politeness, words were brushed off as casual, and the electricity in the air was denied as imagination. But desire has a way of growing in silence. The more it was denied, the stronger it became. The heart grew restless, the body stirred with long, forgotten heat, and thoughts began to drift into places where restraint had no control. It was not lust alone. Though lust was undeniably there, it was longing, raw and unashamed, the kind that came from being awakened after years of slumber. Every encounter grew heavier with unspoken tension. A glance that lingered too long, a hand that brushed by with purpose yet hesitation, a laugh that seemed to lean too close. The line between what was innocent and what was forbidden blurred until it nearly disappeared. Nights grew restless, filled with the echo of his voice, the warmth of his smile, the haunting memory of how close he stood. Even in the quiet, his presence lingered, and in that presence, the body remembered what it was to ache. The fear of being discovered, of being judged, of stepping into something society would never forgive. It was all there, hovering like a storm waiting to break. But stronger than fear was the undeniable truth that once something inside is awakened, it cannot be put back to sleep. The taste of being wanted, truly wanted, even if only in the way he looked, was enough to dismantle every carefully built defense. And slowly, every defense gave way. One evening, when the air was heavy and the silence between them louder than words, the shift finally broke. Eyes met, not in passing but in surrender. His hand brushed against the skin with intention, and the world around seemed to vanish. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't careless, it wasn't reckless. It was inevitable, like the moment the tide finally crashes against the shore after pulling back for so long. That first touch carried years of longing, years of emptiness being filled in a single breath. It wasn't just skin against skin. It was recognition, acceptance, desire, and need all colliding into one undeniable truth. There, in that moment, the question of age no longer existed. Time fell away, fear fell away, and all that remained was two souls burning against one another, finally freed from the prison of silence. And in that freedom, there was no turning back. It is one thing to be looked at, and another thing entirely to be seen. So much of life had been spent being glanced over, acknowledged politely, smiled at in passing, but never truly noticed. Years went by where every effort, every detail, every little spark inside went unrecognized. The body grew older, yes, but what hurt more was how invisible it felt. The world seemed to see only age, only lines, only what was no longer new. But then came eyes that did not stop at the surface. Eyes that did not measure by years, but by something far deeper. Eyes that lingered, as though every detail carried meaning. It began quietly, without drama, without fanfare. He listened differently. He didn't just hear words, but caught the pauses between them, the hesitations, the laughter that almost slipped away before it was allowed to bloom. The smallest stories, ones that had been told without expectation, seemed to matter to him in a way no one had shown in years. When laughter came, it wasn't dismissed. It was held, savored, almost celebrated, as if it was something precious he refused to let fade. That alone began to undo something inside that had been tied up for too long. There had been so many times before when mirrors reflected nothing more than flaws. The reflection carried the weight of time, and the gaze turned away before the eyes could linger too long. But in his presence, the mirror became irrelevant. He looked as if none of that mattered, as if beauty was not something to be measured or compared. His gaze carried no pity, no judgment, no polite dismissal. Instead, it carried hunger and reverence all at once, the kind of attention that stripped away the years and reached directly to the core. The way he looked was not like others. It wasn't a quick scan, it wasn't curiosity or novelty. It was depth, stillness, and recognition. Every curve, every line, every scar even, he seemed to trace with his eyes as if each one had a story worth knowing. What once felt like loss began to feel like proof of living, and in those moments it was impossible to feel invisible. His attention made even silence feel like being spoken to. There was something in the way he leaned closer when laughter escaped, as though he wanted to be part of it, to protect it, to keep it alive. Something in the way he reached out, not to take, but to steady, to anchor, to remind that presence itself was enough. Slowly, a forgotten truth returned the truth that being truly seen is more intoxicating than any compliment, more powerful than any fleeting touch. It was not about being younger, prettier, or flawless. It was about being accepted exactly as is, with no need to pretend. Desire grew from that place, quietly at first, almost shy, as though it didn't trust itself. Yet every time his eyes lingered, every time his voice softened, every time his hand brushed against the skin with both care and need, the fire deepened. It was not just attraction, it was restoration. The body had been touched before, yes, but rarely seen. Now, each touch was more than physical. Each touch was an acknowledgement, a declaration that every part of this existence mattered, that none of it had been wasted, that none of it had lost its worth. There were moments when the weight of insecurity tried to creep in, thoughts of age, of what others might say, of whether this was fair or foolish, but those fears dissolved in his presence. He had a way of silencing doubt without a single word. Just by looking, just by standing close, just by allowing desire to rest openly in his eyes. In that gaze, everything that once felt like weakness became strength. Everything that felt like shame became pride. It is hard to describe what it feels like to be seen this way after years of absence. It is not merely joy, nor comfort, nor passion alone. It is all of these together, woven into a feeling that is as terrifying as it is liberating. Terrifying because it strips away all defenses. Liberating because it finally feels safe to exist without them. His presence demanded nothing but honesty, and in that honesty there was a kind of beauty that no mirror had ever reflected. The nights grew heavier with that awareness. Conversations ended, but the way he had looked remained long after. The air felt charged, the silence between breaths pulled tighter with longing. Even in moments of distance, there was no escaping the memory of how it felt to be watched by someone who refused to let the soul hide. And in that memory, the body stirred with a need that had long been buried. It was not only about passion, it was about validation, restoration, belonging. Eventually, it became impossible to resist the pull. There came a moment when his hand lifted a strand of hair, slow, deliberate, and the world shifted. The touch lingered against the face, the thumb brushing against skin that had not been touched with such reverence in years. In that instant, it felt as though time itself paused, not to remind of what had been lost, but to reveal what had been found. The kiss that followed was not rushed, not desperate, but inevitable, a sealing of what had been growing in every glance, every word, every silence. And in that kiss, the years vanished. What mattered was not who was older or younger, not what others might think, not what tomorrow might bring. What mattered was that, for the first time, every hidden part of existence was brought into the light and held without hesitation. To be truly seen is to be truly alive. There comes a moment when hesitation can no longer hold back what has been building in silence. For so long, restraint carried the weight of every doubt, every question, every fear about what it might mean to give in. The heart fought against itself, telling reason to stay firm, reminding of the lines that should not be crossed. Yet the body betrayed that resistance in every stolen glance, every lingering touch, every night spent replaying the sound of his voice. It was only a matter of time before the fire growing between us would demand to be fed. The night it happened did not begin with plans, but with the same subtle pull that had been drawing us closer each day. The air was thick with everything left unsaid, the silence stretching long enough to make every breath feel like a confession. He stood close, too close, and though words still danced on the edge of my lips, they would not come. Instead, there was only the thundering of a heartbeat that no longer cared about rules. His eyes held mine, steady and unflinching, asking nothing and yet giving everything. When his hand finally reached out, it felt like the breaking of a dam. That simple touch on the skin carried more weight than any declaration ever could. It was careful, almost trembling, as if he too knew that once it began, there would be no turning back. But the body leaned into it, answering with a surrender that had been waiting, aching, for far too long. And in that surrender, hesitation collapsed. The first kiss was slow, almost reverent, as though both of us were testing the waters of a forbidden sea. His lips tasted of fire and hesitation, of hunger barely contained. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of us suspended in the gravity of a moment that could no longer be denied. That kiss deepened, became urgent, became desperate, until words lost all meaning. Every touch spoke louder than language. Every kiss stripped away another layer of resistance. Clothes did not fall away in haste, but in waves of trembling hands and lingering touches. Each piece removed was not just fabric, but another wall collapsing between us. The heat of skin against skin was like coming home after years of wandering cold. Every line of the body was traced as if it were sacred, every curve kissed as though time itself had carved it with purpose. The difference in age disappeared. What remained was the undeniable truth of two bodies meeting in the honesty of desire. He touched not with urgency alone, but with reverence, as though each part of me was something he had longed to discover. And in his touch, I was reborn. Years of silence, of being unseen, dissolved under his hands. Every sigh drawn from my lips seemed to feed his hunger, and every moan that escaped his throat became a song that carried us deeper into a rhythm no one could control. There was no fear in that moment, no judgment, no hesitation, only fire and tenderness, passion and trust woven together in the rawest form of love. His kisses traveled with devotion, each one branding the skin with a truth that words could never reach. The body arched into his, not out of duty or performance, but from the pure, unashamed need to be closer, deeper, more entwined. The line we had tried so hard to keep had vanished, replaced by the inevitability of two souls bound by a desire that had waited too long. The world outside could have ended that night, and it would not have mattered. The only reality was his breath against my neck, his hands pulling me closer, his voice breaking into whispers that shook with both tenderness and need. Every movement between us was both a plea and a promise, every gasp a confession that neither of us had dared to speak before. We belonged to the moment fully, stripped of every mask, every fear, every pretense. The rhythm of our bodies found its own language, one older and more honest than any words could create. It was not about youth or age, about right or wrong, about what should or should not be. It was about the undeniable truth that love had found a way to take form in the rawest and most intimate expression possible. Every thrust, every cry, every desperate kiss carried the weight of love and the freedom of surrender. When it was finally over, when the fire quieted into trembling breath and the room was heavy with the scent of our bodies, silence returned, but it was not the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of belonging, of two hearts that had crossed the line and found themselves on the other side, changed forever. His hand rested against mine, his chest rose and fell beside me, and in that stillness came the realization that there would be no return to what had been before. The forbidden had become inevitable, and in giving in, we had found something more powerful than restraint could ever hold back. There are loves that ignite like fire, fierce and consuming, burning bright but quick to fade. And then there are loves that do not arrive with thunder, but instead grow like a flame that refuses to die, steady, unwavering, deepening with every breath. What began with desire, with stolen glances and restless nights, soon revealed itself to be something far greater than passion alone. There was tenderness beneath the fire, a belonging that stretched beyond the body, beyond the hunger, beyond even the fear of what the world might say. Each embrace carried a meaning no words could fully capture. When his arms wrapped around me, It was not just the closeness of skin, but the feeling of being anchored in a place I never thought I would find again. The years between us melted away in those moments, leaving only the undeniable truth that souls do not recognize numbers, only connection. There was no calculation, no hesitation, only the deep and quiet certainty that this was not fleeting. The whispers in the dark were more powerful than any promise spoken aloud. They carried no rehearsed vows, no grand declarations, yet they held eternity in their weight. The way he whispered my name, the way his breath brushed against my ear, made every part of me believe in forever, even when reason tried to deny it. It was not just the words themselves, but the truth behind them. Every whisper told me I was seen, wanted, needed, not as an idea, not as a substitute, but as the only one. In the mornings when sunlight touched his face, I would watch him sleep, the rise and fall of his chest steady and calm, and I knew then that love had broken through the limits I once thought unshakable. It was not about the years I had lived or the years he had yet to see. It was about the way time seemed irrelevant in his presence, the way the heart cared nothing for age when it found a soul that fit. The world might call it unusual, even forbidden, but to us it was natural, inevitable. The passion we shared did not vanish with the quiet moments. It lived inside the tenderness, wrapped itself around every small act. The way his hand would reach for mine in silence, the way he would brush the hair from my face, as if it were the most sacred gesture in the world, carried more power than the fiercest kiss. Desire had drawn us together, but it was love, raw, unshakable love, that held us in place. There were times when doubt tried to creep in, when the thought of tomorrow or the judgment of others pressed heavy on my chest. But every time those fears rose, he answered them not with arguments but with presence. His eyes would find mine steady and unyielding, and in that gaze the doubts fell quiet. It was as if he was saying without words that nothing else mattered, that what we had was not bound by what others thought they could define. And in his gaze I believed it. We did not live in illusions. The years between us were real. The world outside us was real, but none of it dimmed what burned between us. If anything, it made every moment more precious, every kiss more urgent, every embrace more profound. We lived as though each day was a gift stolen from time, and in that stolen time we found eternity. The fire of passion was always there, but it never consumed without care. It blended with tenderness, with respect, with a devotion that gave it meaning. It was not just about touching bodies, but about touching souls, about weaving together two lives that had no reason to meet and yet could not stay apart. His love did not erase the years I carried, it honored them. My love did not dismiss his youth, it cherished it. Together, we created something that defied time itself. Even in silence, love spoke. Sitting together without words, listening to the rhythm of his breath, the beat of his heart, I felt the kind of peace that no amount of logic could offer. There was no need to question if it was real, no need to prove it to anyone. It existed because it was undeniable, because it was written into the very fabric of who we were when we came together. This love was not fleeting. It was not shallow. It was not fragile. It was a love that transcended time and age, a love that burned with passion but was softened with tenderness, a love that promised eternity not in words carved into stone, but in the quiet strength of every touch, every kiss, every moment of simply being together. And in that truth, I knew I had found the kind of love that does not come twice in a lifetime. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without giving it a like, sharing it with someone who still believes in timeless love, and subscribing to hear more stories that speak straight to the soul. Until next time, remember love is not bound by time, only by the depth of the heart that dares to feel it.